Hello, Dr. James Bogash, expert in health and longevity. This is going to be yet another topic on long COVID or post-acute sequelae of COVID, PASC. And let me be clear by saying that we have always had people who have not done well after a viral infection. I talk to people with MS or chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. A lot of times they will say that it started with a viral infection, and their immune system just went crazy after that. But largely the world has pushed COVID to the side and is actually living their life. But if you spend any time on Twitter, you will find that long COVID is the new, it's like these people can't let go of something to be fearful of, and that newest fear is long COVID. And they talk about an onslaught of millions of people on disability because of long COVID, and so again, very real, but we're going to talk about some aspects of it and why it may be more of a concern because of every freaking thing we heard about COVID in the beginning of everything. So I do want to make a couple other things clear, is that first of all, things like loss of smell and taste and shortness of breath or oxygen, like I've had patients who have had problems after COVID. Most of them have worked through that. It's been a little bit of a challenge. Smell and taste is just usually a time thing. It will come back. That's very real. That doesn't have anything to do with your psychological state or what you believe or this or that. Like, that's a really real thing that people experience, and it's hard to argue that. Shortness of breath or oxygen problems are another one that is pretty common afterwards. The lungs take a beating in COVID. It takes some work to get them back. We've had patients who have done our hyperbaric chamber that have done very well with that. People who have worked cardio on their end. Like, there are answers to that, and those are very real after COVID. So we're going to go to this study looking at over 55,000 people from April 20 to November 21st, so really in the heart of a lot of COVID. And they looked at the people that had, before they got COVID, they looked at their reporting of psychological factors like depression, anxiety, loneliness, stress, perceived worry, and holy shit did these things go up at the beginning of, because all you could hear was that if you just walked to buy COVID in the grocery store, you were going to die. And there was nothing you could do. It was all luck of the draw. Exercise, weight, diet, like those didn't matter. You were going to die. This is like living like 5 family members with Ebola, and you're the only one that still hasn't gotten it. It's just a matter of time, and when you do, you're going to die. And this was obviously worse with people with pre-existing conditions. If you had diabetes, like, don't work on the diabetes, just stress more. And that's what people did, right? Because we didn't give them information. We just said, yeah, there's nothing you can do. The absolute worst thing that I think of from a public health standpoint is to not educate people about taking better care of themselves. But they found that these people that had these psychological factors before they got COVID were more likely to experience long COVID symptoms. This is what I've been saying all along. It's not that they're making these things up. It's just that constant media onslaught primed the immune system for a really bad response to a viral infection. And like that totally makes sense. And yet we're not acknowledging that a lot of the harm came from this psychological distress that we induced. Part of public health was designed to induce stress, to have masks constantly so you're always reminded that something's going on, and stay at home, do this, whatever. There's no longer denying it. It's not to say that these people do or don't, but if you haven't had COVID yet, if you're like one of the 4 people in Antarctica that have not, having a healthy mental state is probably one of the best things you can do to lower your risk of post-COVID. But interestingly enough, they also found that the people who, when they had COVID, their symptoms, with the exception of a cough and sense of smell and taste, they were worse with people with psychological issues before they got COVID. So not only did it increase the risk of long COVID, it increased the risk of COVID symptoms because you were so stressed out before you finally got COVID, because ultimately everybody was going to. So this was further exemplified by another study in another JAMA publication in children and adolescents in Germany. They looked at the risk of myalgic encephalitis or chronic fatigue, which are considered severe aspects of long COVID, and whether or not long COVID increased the risk, COVID increased the risk of developing myalgic encephalitis or chronic fatigue. And the answer was yes, that people who had COVID were more likely to develop these types of symptoms, until they broke it out, and the people who didn't know whether they had COVID or not, they used antibody testing. So when the parents and the kids didn't know if the kids had COVID, we had no idea, they were asymptomatic, all of a sudden there was no risk. So our perception had everything to do with whether or not somebody's symptoms afterwards were linked to COVID. It's just crazy. And this is the new hat to hang on for people that want to keep with the thing to worry about COVID and the COVID. Those are the zero COVID people. One end you have the zero COVID, and the other end you have the COVID deniers, and nobody's in the middle. It's like far right, far left. Nobody's in the middle, which actually most people are in the middle. But the zero COVID people are now like, this is their thing. Like, we can't get COVID because people are going to get long COVID, and everybody's going to be on disability, and the world's going to fall apart. So, as always, I will post a link to these particular studies in the description. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs the information, and subscribe to the channel.